by taking on all their bad debts. They would make these ridiculous bets, like a subprime bet or some other derivatives bet. They would go bad, and they'd all pay themselves, and they'd get great bonuses. And then to get that garbage off their books of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan or Credit Suisse or BNP Bank, the central banks would take it from them and swap it for fresh treasury bills. And the idea was that eventually this wouldn't work anymore. We'd have to bail out the central banks themselves, and we'd create a global lending facility, $100 trillion lending facility. Maybe we'll do an IMF special drawing right. We'll just float this, we'll extend and pretend. But now, there's a war going on. So that strategy was short-sighted because it would only work if there was total globalization and total dollarization. But now that we're in deglobalization and de-dollarization, that end game of floating all the bad central bank debt to a mega central bank. I mean, they will try it with central bank digital currencies, and there's another chapter to come here. But the Bank of England clearly, after 300 years, does now have to declare bankruptcy, as we knew that it would, because the economy was just skating on fumes and hamster poop that they kept in the basement at a chateau somewhere in Switzerland and claimed that that had collateral value. Well, guess what? It doesn't. All right, well, this is the problem of having a monarchy and an aristocracy in place, is that when times get tough, as they're getting now, the monarchs and the aristocrats are going to jump ship, right? This is a rearguard action. This is their chief sanctions officer is trying to burn the bridges as they're running away, essentially. And this is what the aristocracy and the monarchy plan to do in Britain and what's left of the aristocrat in continental Europe as well. We don't have an aristocratic class in the United States. We have an oligarchy class, and they'll be on their 300-foot yachts over there in Bimini or somewhere sipping Mai Tais with Jeff Bezos. But in Europe, it's a long-established tradition to simply, get your gold on the horses and start running away. Right. Well, to your point, that no one has planned for this. Even though it was very obvious that the end game was in sight, nobody actually planned for it, which of course would be evidentially so. It wouldn't be catastrophic if people were planning for it. So how can you have a catastrophic end game without having everybody not plan for it? Am I right? Oh, yeah. Well, I remember back at Bitcoin 2022, Miami, or 2021, the best party at the event was the Swan Party. So if it's going to be anything like that, it's going to be that times 100x. So good show there. Sounds fantastic. Now, you run a Bitcoin-only operation in the past 3 years since you first founded Swan. What has been the biggest challenge in the Bitcoin market and the newbies mentality? That time frame, how has it changed over 3 years, if at all? And how is driving adoption going? It's very cyclical, in this industry, going back to the beginning. There was the first wave of what we call shitcoins, back at the end of 2011, 2012. And of course, those names are long gone. And every 36 months or so, we see some new names near the top of the market cap list, and then they disappear. And it just goes over and over again. They package this thing over. They call it DeFi. They call it CeFi. It just, it's the same story over and over again. And you've come, the meme of "here comes Corey" is a meme on Bitcoin Twitter. It's a meme of, I guess it's a guy on a beach who looks like he's really, focused on getting somewhere. And how did you take this role? How did this happen? Because you became the go-to guy for really unpacking in a very methodical, pragmatic way the fallacies and the shortcomings of these shitcoins. Beyond just the name calling that I might engage in, you actually go into it and explain why they are in fact garbage. How did that come about?
So
right, I guess it was Luna when you correctly predicted a few weeks or a few months in advance. You just laid out the case and said, this is going to collapse utterly. This is how it's going to collapse. This is probably when it's going to collapse. And sure enough, it followed that script. And that caught the attention of some mainstream writers in Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and these types of outlets, CNBC. And they really took notice. Yeah. And so you got that message out there about really differentiating between Bitcoin and everything else in the market. That point had been lost. And it's still grouped together. That differentiation doesn't usually occur, but you have been great at educating the media about how to talk about this. Now, El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender just over a year ago. Your thoughts on the significance of that, and also on the fact that they have remained Bitcoin maximalists, so much so that the President Bukele is on the cover of Bitcoin magazine looking like a founding father of the Orange Party. Corey. Right. We'll talk a little more about El Zante Capital, but just to follow up on the El Salvador and Bukele story, you know, the mainstream financial press, mostly out of New York, claims El Salvador's Bitcoin project has failed. What would you say? Well, in corporate terms, you know, we've had examples, whether it's the Tylenol scare, Perrier had to totally rebrand themselves, turn themselves around. And we see this all the time. It's an economy that's roughly $28 billion in size, so it's not even as big as a big multinational like a Nike corporation or a Coca-Cola, for example. If one of these huge corporations decided they needed to rebrand themselves, relaunch themselves on a brand basis, how much would they spend on something like that? How much would Nike spend if they decided to totally rebrand themselves?
Oh, wow. Many billions of dollars for Nike.
Okay, so here's a many billions of dollar rebranding exercise. Now let's go back to El Salvador. They put 100 million into Bitcoin. They're sitting on a $50 million paper loss. Of course, it's not a realized loss, it's a paper loss. And they took a country that had a 30-year bad reputation, and now they're growing at 10% a year. I mean, is that the branding success story of the century? I mean, you've worked in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Incredible home run. And the economy is going to grow. It's going to be positive again this year. And tourism just reported up 85%. Forward investment is up. Okay, El Zante Capital, which is a venture capital fund you, me, and Stacy Herbert started there a couple of years ago, or 1 year ago. And what do you see the potential being there? Orange future. I'm assuming that has something to do with Bitcoin. And a country like El Salvador that has made Bitcoin legal tender, they're on a Bitcoin standard, they're seeing huge benefits from this. So I would posit that you believe that El Salvador is heading into a bright orange future. What does that mean, Corey?